Hi, everyone. This is Jessie Saintcyr, and I am your presenter today. And we're going to be talking about managing the realities of telework during the pandemic. This is a recorded webinar, and so we will not have a Q&A. But I will speak to opportunities for a Q&A in the future. So before we get right into the webinar, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you're having any issues viewing this webinar, one of the best things to do is to really close your browser or log out and then log back in so that you can view the webinar. But essentially, this is on demand, and so you can watch it at any point in time. Um, so during the live webinar, we did do a Q&A. We spent about 30 minutes answering questions um, for participants from different industries. And we talked about layoffs. We talked about managing up. We talked about um, essential workers who have health concerns or safety concerns. We talked about a number of other topics. And so I thought that was really helpful. And based on the feedback, the participants felt that was very, very helpful as well. And so we're looking at doing a Q&A for those who are watching this recorded webinar. And if there's enough interest, so if you email info@saintcyrconsulting.com, you'll see that at the end of this presentation, and you're interested in a, um, a Q&A session, a live Q&A session, then we'll do it, okay? But let's just get started with this webinar. So a little bit about my background. I am, again, Jessie Saintcyr. I am your presenter. I am also the principal owner of Saintcyr Consulting, which is a management consulting company. And we really focus on leadership development and management training. And the goal really is to build future leaders or to support current leaders in their roles, to think about their roles differently, to think of themselves as really stewards of talent and people who can empower others and build future leaders. And so we have a wide range of training and development services and coaching services as well at www.saintcyrconsulting.com is where you can find more information. But I am an attorney by trade, also spent a lot of time in HR. Before I started the Saintcyr Consulting company, I was the Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Massachusetts Department of Transportation, Chief Administrative Officer, and oversaw all of HR for MassDOT and the MBTA. And when I first joined in 2015 after Snowmageddon, I was recruited to really address a number of ineffective workplace and workforce programs, policies, and practices. And before that, I was recruited really to do similar work, a lot of turnaround transformation work for the state treasury. And my last role there was as deputy treasurer for the Commonwealth. So I have considerable experience in HR, leadership development, training, and some employment law experience as well. Another thing about me, I'm actually here in Texas, but I am a Massachusetts native. And one fun fact is I am the third of 10 children, same parents. My mom is still with us, and my dad passed away in 2012. So I'm used to leading by default. And so I have considerable experience in my personal life, but also in my professional and community experience in leading, supporting, and advising leaders and training as well. So that's just a little bit about my background. Um, so, in terms of the agenda, what we're going to be talking about today is some of the common challenges that everyone is facing while working from home, those who have to or need to work from home or are required to work from home. We'll talk about how to really reset expectations, how to reprioritize the work that really is important. I think there is really a focus on trying to do as much as possible, but I think there needs to be some consistency in terms of how we worked prior to the pandemic and how we're working now, really around hours, availability, work that we should be doing at home or can be doing at home, and work that can actually wait for another time, or we just reassess and do the work at another time. We'll talk about how to lead human. That's about leading with care, leading with consideration, leading with communication. And you'll hear sprinkles of that throughout this presentation. And then this is a bonus topic that is not in the live webinar. We're going to talk about self-care because from the live webinar, I really heard a lot of stress from anyone who was on it. And I just wanted to share some things that I've been doing that might help you as well. So this is the reality for a lot of folks who have little ones at home. You know, they're trying to work, they're trying to focus on what they need to do for their jobs. But they have little ones at home who need their attention, and they are distracted, right? They're trying to manage home life and they're trying to manage work life. And that's not always easy for a lot of folks. And if you don't have a little one, you might have children who are in school and who are learning from home. And you know, the thing is, everyone who can be at home or who needs to be at home is at home. So you may have little ones who are in school, and while they're learning online, you have to manage their time and ensure that they are checking in, that they're doing their classwork. If you don't have children at home, your spouse is at home, your partner is at home, your pets are at home and they need to be walked. So there's limited space. You know, you can't just walk around unless you have a massive home and you can kind of have a little bit more privacy. That's not always possible, right? And so there really is very little physical separation from everybody, but also the separation between work life and home life is very much blurred at this time. And even if you're working from home, there are also financial concerns. Um, you know, people are concerned that their jobs won't be there in the next few months. So that creates some level of anxiety. There are health concerns, especially if you have underlying health conditions. You're very much limited in your mobility. You can't really connect or go outside to do groceries, or if you do, you have to do it at certain times of the day. And you have to have protected gear if you choose to go out and get groceries, right? So there are a lot of concerns. There are people who that I know personally who have gotten sick, friends who've had loved ones who've passed away. So that brings on additional stress and concern. And then the last thing is access, right? Some folks, when they had to move to telework or working from home, did not necessarily have the level of access. They probably didn't have reliable Wi-Fi, or they didn't have access to a computer, or if they had a computer, they had to share the computer with everybody else. And so there were concerns around access. And in some cases, there are still concerns around access. I spoke to someone who is a leader in a public school system, and she was sharing with me the challenges that students are still having, and that they don't have Wi-Fi, or they don't have a laptop, or they don't have a device where they can check in and get their homeworks done. So people across the board are having challenges in one way, shape, or form. This pandemic has touched virtually everyone. And so, life looks different for those who are working from home, and they're stressed. This is just, what some folks may look like. I think for me at the beginning of this, I'm a small business owner. My business has been impacted tremendously by this. And so it's really not easy, to try to work and also figure out all of the things that are really outside of our control. And so, you know, stress is the reality for a lot of people. But I think one of the things that we can do to really manage our stress, manage our work, manage our day to day is by number one, resetting expectations. And this webinar is really geared towards leaders, managers who have employees working from home, but a lot of these tips and best practices or recommendations can help you in your own personal life and your professional life as well. So number one, resetting expectations. We really got to think about availability. So, in terms of availability, if you have employees who are working from home, think more in terms of, um, your business needs. Employees should not have to be tethered to their laptops, right? They shouldn't have to be available 24/7, or even if the regular work hours is, let's say, 9 to 5. Very few people are working 9 to 5 at this point, but let's say they were expected to work 11 to 7, right? When they're working from home, the thing is they may not have work to do from 11 to 7, or from 9 to 5, or 10 to 10, right? Maybe there are certain peak times where customers need support, and that's when they should be available. Maybe there are certain projects that employees have to work on, and you need them to provide updates on those projects, or there are communication updates, things happening in the organization, changes to the business, new information that's going out, and they need to be made available for that. So those are things that really we should be focusing on, as opposed to being available all of the time. So focus more on outcome than on availability, so that employees, again, are not tethered to their laptops. You're not tethered to your laptop, but the work is getting done. And another point here is that I think most people are trying to do their best. And so you want to give employees the benefit of the doubt that they are trying to be responsible, that they're giving their best, and that the work will get done. And we'll talk about performance management a little bit when we talk about accountability. But if your employees have shown you over the course of this time that they're getting the work done, then really think about availability different. Think more in terms of outcome, tie availability to business needs, peak times, projects, updates, and some other things. The other thing I would ask you to think about in terms of resetting expectations is mental health. Because of all the challenges that I talked about earlier, mental health is really important, and striking a balance is important right now. So the thing that I would suggest is to try to avoid burnout, again, for you and for your team. So one of the things that you can do is to connect employees to your employee assistance program. If you're part of an organization and they have an employee assistance program or EAP, this is the time to really maybe coordinate with HR, see what's available. What resources are available to help with family needs, with legal, financial needs that the employees can take advantage of. There are a lot of other resources being made available through local and state government at this time. Hotlines are available. And things like Good Samaritan, or and I can't remember the exact um, the name. It slips my mind right now, but I literally just thought about it during this webinar. But it's the Good Samaritan, I believe, which is helps with suicide prevention, because again, this is a very, very challenging time with for a lot of people. Some people have lost their family members, some have lost friends, and they are stressed. And so tap into your employee assistance program. If you don't have an employee assistance program, one of the things that you can do is really just check in, schedule times throughout the week, maybe once a week or twice a week, where you're just checking in with your team. You could do this one by one, or you could just meet with your team virtually once a week, just to see how they're doing. One of the questions you can ask is, hey, I know everyone is doing their best, and these are challenging and uncertain times, but I just wanted to see how everyone is doing, and is there anything we can do to help you further? And open it up for discussion. And the thing is, if people aren't comfortable sharing, you could tell them that they could reach out to you at another point in time. You definitely want to check in with HR if you have an HR department, just to get some guidance on some best practices and resources that you can share at that time. The other thing you can do around mental health and really avoiding burnout is allowing for free time. I saw a story on a news channel where a education commissioner, or was the head of a board, he just told everyone, the students and the teachers and the parents, this week we're not doing any homework. I just want you to relax. I want you to enjoy your family. I want you to enjoy your friends. Just take some time, take a breather. In fact, I've talked to some other friends who have who know people who are teachers, and teachers are really tired and they're burned out and they're doing so much and they've had to make a lot of adjustments. This is really a good time to create some work-life balance. And if maybe it's a Friday, and there's really not much to do, or you can afford to maybe push off or delay some work for the following week, maybe say, hey, we can resume our check-ins next week, or you don't necessarily have to be available today, but if there's an emergency, just make sure that your phones are on, so that if I text or if I email, that you can respond. But maybe check your phones periodically throughout the day. But I just want everybody to enjoy this Friday and enjoy their families, or just take a breather. Everybody really needs some free time right now. So I think that would be a gift to your teams. It's something that you definitely want to consider. But this is an opportunity to strengthen your culture. And if your culture is one that really puts people first and that believes in taking care of employees, this is the time to strengthen that culture by creating some work-life balance. And we talked about that in terms of focusing on outcomes as opposed to availability, mental health, and freeing up time for employees, providing resources, checking in just to say hello. And then in terms of work-life balance, appreciating the fact that people are staying home and doing work. And there's a lot of other things outside of their control that they're trying to manage at this time. And so the more that you can create or support more of a work and home balance, so that they can feel like their homes are still a place of refuge, a place where they could get some reprieve, or retrieve, and enjoy their families, then I think that will help. And they can create a new normal for themselves. The other thing is that when they return back to work, they'll remember how you treated them. They'll remember how you supported them during this time. So how you engage them now is going to make a difference. Not only will they feel that you cared for them, but when they return to work, they'll remember that. And I think that will create greater sense of loyalty, respect, and appreciation for the employer, for you, their leader, and their manager. And I think what you'll see is really employees who feel more balanced, because you help them create that balance. You allowed them to really manage their times. You'll keep them accountable, and we'll talk about that. But you help them really focus on things that are most important, by resetting expectations. But you're also helping them in terms of the work-life balance. So this is just, I think, what that would look like. Maybe the employee is able to catch up with a friend, or maybe they're doing some work and they're talking to you, but they're not frustrated and exhausted like they were in the previous slide. And maybe their child is able to keep in touch with his classroom, or his fellow students, and maybe he's doing a classroom exercise, right? And they can focus without being stressed unnecessarily, or they don't feel the additional burdens of having to work from home with all that is going on with the pandemic. So in terms of resetting expectations, I think the next step is to really reprioritize. We talked about outcomes versus availability, but in terms of outcomes, really think about the end in mind. One of the books I've actually been reading, and have not had a chance to read it until now, one of my my favorite book is this book by Stephen Covey, and it's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, I would highly, highly recommend it. This is Stephen Covey. And he's the author of a number of other books, but brilliant man. This is a fantastic book, but he talks about focusing on outcomes, having or thinking with the end in mind. But I think this is something that leaders can really do, managers can really do when the stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders are lifted, and we get back to some sense of normalcy, or maybe a new normal. Where do you want to be, right, in terms of your relationship with your employees? How do you want them to feel? You want them to think of you as a leader who cared, as a leader who supported them, as a leader who appreciated the realities that they were having to deal with, someone who helped them and supported them during this time, right? Do you want to see your employees come back? All right, because I know of employees who have decided they're very marketable, they have great skills, and they can go anywhere, and they've jumped ship, right? Because they had employers, leaders, managers who weren't as considerate of their time, as considerate in terms of work-life balance. They didn't really have, any career strategies for them. And so this was an opportunity for them to jump ship, and they decided to do that. So really think about the end. Where do you want to end up when we get back to a place of a new normal, or so a sense of normalcy? Where do you want to end up? And lead that way, right? Engage your employees that way. You want them to feel appreciated. Thank them, and we'll talk about how to do that when you're giving feedback, when you're checking in. Another thing you want to think about here is deliverables, right? Just because you can get a lot done right now because everyone is home, it doesn't mean that you should get everything done right now. So when you're reprioritizing, think in terms of the deliverables. What actually needs to get done right now? What's feasible given that a lot of people are working from home? What projects are really a priority for your group, for your department, for the organization, for the business, for your clients, for your customers, for the constituents? What really needs to get done right now, and what can you hold off for another point in time, right? One of the folks that I spoke to, and let me step back here. So, in putting this webinar together, I had spoken to dozens of working professionals, leaders from various industries about some of the challenges that they were experiencing and facing, and even to some clients on what challenges they were seeing and were facing. And so some of my examples are directly from that, and really some of the challenges I've been facing. So when I speak to this, it's just real life challenges and real life opportunities to really reprioritize and focus again with the end in mind. So focus on what needs to get done now. Just because you can get a lot of work done here, it doesn't mean that you should. And that this all depends on the work that you do, right? It all depends on your team, and it all depends on how stressed everyone is, the challenges that some of your employees are having. You really have to make that decision as a leader as to what the priorities are, what are some of the deliverables that you want to see, what you want to achieve at this time. Another thing I would say you want to think about is just the quality of the work. Again, you don't want to pile on. You want to focus on things that are achievable, things that are feasible during this time, things that can be executed with a level of excellence, so that the quality of your products and services are consistent or near what you were able to put out before the pandemic. So if that means you have to do less well, then it's better to do less well. As a small business owner, for me, my focus is on delivering services that I can manage, that I can support through my business, given my limited mobility, given the limited mobility of some of my contractors, and some of the challenges that everyone is facing, and also concerns that clients are having around cash flow or their budgets, because maybe they have to think about layoffs, or maybe they have to think about just having reserves, right? So that they can be able to get through this without having to lay off, without having to make additional adjustments. So in terms of accountability, and I touched on this a little bit, but I want to go a little deeper here. Again, we are focusing on resetting expectations, reprioritizing, creating more of a work-life balance, appreciating the challenges that employees are having. And while you want to lead human and lead with care, the reality also is that employees are getting paid to do a work. So you do want to keep them accountable. Um, and we'll talk about 5 things you want to remember around accountability, maintaining and keeping accountability. But at the beginning of this pandemic, where there were sheltering in place orders and things like that, I put out on my LinkedIn page um, some tips on how to transition to telework. And I talked about accountability, and some of those tips and best practices are on the saintcyrconsulting.com website, and there's a COVID-19 resource page, and so you can find that at the bottom of the page. There are actually 4 tips and recommendations that I give. One is around alternatives to layoffs, so you could find that there. We continue to update that website to provide information that will be helpful to you. But in terms of accountability, uh, if you have not done this, you should do this. Is to be clear around expectations, not things that are different or a complete departure from what employees are expected to do, but consistent with their job descriptions, consistent with what was discussed maybe at the beginning of this crisis, or maybe you have to reset expectations and you have to revisit that conversation. But this is if you haven't done that, you probably want to be clear on what those expectations are. If there are any questions, a good time to answer those questions and get some level of agreement from your employees. Because the thing is about communicating expectations is sometimes you think there are things that are possible that your employees probably know are not possible to do at home, right? Or they have challenges that you're not aware of. So this is really a good time to do that if you haven't done it. Again, it should be consistent with job descriptions, with what you would do before the pandemic. So it's not a major departure from the work that they've been doing. And if there needs to be some adjustments, that they're reasonable and in line with the work that they're doing. Now, these are unusual times, so everyone has to pitch in and maybe do something different. You definitely want to be clear on what that is and why you're doing it. If you have an HR department, if you have an HR leader and you may maybe touch base with them before you have that conversation, this is a great time to do it. And if you don't have those types of services and you need some coaching, you can reach out to me at info@saintcyrconsulting.com, and we could probably set up a consultation. But be clear on expectations. Set up check-ins, and I talked about check-ins in terms of just seeing how people are doing, seeing where they are, if they're stressed, if they need additional resources, if they need additional support. But in terms of accountability, you want to check in to see where they are in terms of the work, right? So now you're asking them not to be available all of the time, but to be available when you need to check in, when there are updates on different projects, or when there are communication updates that they need to hear or that they need to share, right? And so when you're doing the check-ins, you really need to talk about the deliverables, right? So we talked about this project, we talked about this task. Where are you on it? What progress have you made? Are you having challenges? What are those challenges? Do you need additional resources? What are those resources? Um, this is a time to also give feedback, right? So if they're making great progress, um, you definitely want to thank them for the progress that they're making. And let me step back here and say that, um, when you're doing check-ins, especially now, you want to thank your employees for their contributions. You want to thank them for continuing to support you as a leader and to support the organization. And to remind them that we're all in this together. And whatever you can do to support them during this time, you would love to hear that. And if there are any ideas that they have, this is an opportunity to really share that. And maybe they may not have an idea now, but give them a way to contact you so that they can share their ideas and even give you feedback on what's working and what's not working. But in terms of their work, make sure you're giving them feedback. On the work that they're doing, where they are. If they haven't made progress, you need to be clear that you guys had sat down, or you may have talked about what those expectations are, and this is not what you expected, that there may not be making the level of progress, maybe in comparison to their peers, and listen to hear if there are any challenges that maybe you can address, or if they need to maybe reprioritize, maybe they need to reset, maybe they need to do the work differently, and this is maybe an opportunity to hear from them and for you to share some thoughts. But if they're having performance issues, and this is either consistent with the way that they were working before, you definitely want to document. If this is inconsistent with some of the ways that they've performed before, you want to document that as well. And again, listen for challenges, listen for opportunities maybe to help them achieve certain results. And if there are medical issues, you definitely want to reach out to HR and make sure that if they should be applying for FMLA, they should be applying for some type of leave, where there are other challenges, like even domestic violence. You never know that they get the proper support that they can get. Um, but document, document, document. Just because we're in a pandemic and a crisis and people are working from home doesn't mean that we just give everyone carte blanche and that we don't manage and we don't keep people accountable. Make sure that you're documenting so that if there are continued performance issues, that maybe you have to put them on a performance improvement plan, maybe not now, maybe later. Maybe this is something you have to circle back to at another time. Maybe you give them feedback in the moment, but you definitely want to record with a summary of your conversation and the challenges that you've had, or maybe resources that you recommended, or ways that you gave them feedback to help them improve. And if they don't improve, that you're documenting that as well. And let's say they're doing well, all right, and they've gone above and beyond and they're helping everyone else. You want to document that as well, and maybe give a shout out and maybe share best practices or new ways of doing things based on what employees are sharing with you. So you definitely want to give a shout out. You definitely want to thank them for going above and beyond. Maybe they're just doing status quo, but they're doing it with excellence, and their work is of quality. You definitely want to thank them. But altogether, if employees are working from home, take time to thank them for their contributions and their efforts during this time. So ultimately, you definitely want to lead with care. Um, as I mentioned before, avoid burnout. And the ways that you can do that is by resetting expectations, reprioritizing, focusing on the things that matter most, projects that really can get done at home, tasks that are really reasonable for employees to be doing. Don't pile on a bunch of work just because people are at home. People are at home, but they're at home during a pandemic. They're at home and people are sick and people are dying. They're at home and people are concerned about jobs and job security. People are at home and they have other family members and friends and loved ones and pets and all of that at home. So it's not business as usual, and you have to be mindful of that and give people space, right, to just maybe step back, and maybe you give them Fridays off. Maybe they don't have to check in on certain days. Maybe there are projects that can wait, and you can maybe stretch out. Again, it depends on your situation. It depends on the circumstance. Um, and then two, lead human, lead with care. And we talked about that, right? When you reset, when you reprioritize, when you help employees strike a work-life balance, you're leading human. You're leading with care. You're leading with consideration, appreciating all of the challenges. And maybe you can't fully appreciate all of them, but at least you're mindful that there are challenges, and maybe you're thinking about the work differently, getting resources to employees, and maybe focusing on work that they can actually do from home so that they feel like they're contributing, but they are not being asked to do work that really they can't do at this time because of some of those challenges. Um, and then lead with communication. Every chance you get, and be genuine about it. Let folks know, let your team know, let your workforce know that you care, that you appreciate them. You thank them for their contributions, thank them for their efforts. Tell them you understand, and be genuine about it. That everyone is dealing with a certain set of challenges during this time, and that you'll communicate, you'll share information, you'll support, or you'll make resources available to support them at this time. And then third, think long term. Where do you want to end up? Again, think with the end in mind. Again, I shared this book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So this is an opportunity to really think long term, and not just in terms of outcomes, but how do you want to show up as a leader during this time, right? How do you want employees to think of you as a supervisor, a manager, or a leader, right? If you have a culture that puts people first, how are you putting employees first? um, During this time, right? Again, keeping them accountable, trying to get the work done, but how do you show up as a leader during this time? How do you want to be known, right? When this is all said and done, what do you want employees to think of you? Or how do you want your peers or your organization to regard you? Because how you engage them will make a difference, not just in terms of um, the day-to-day work and your teams, but it does impact morale. It does impact your reputation as a business, um, and word does get out, right? So when you're in a place that you can recruit again, your internal reputation, your internal brand is as important as your external brand. So if you say that you put people first and you don't put your employees first, by how you care for them during this pandemic, when it's time to recruit people, your employees are not going to tell folks within their network. They're not going to talk about your business. They'll probably tell people, "Listen, I'm trying to get out myself." And I've had that. I've heard from employees from in different organizations who are like, I wouldn't recommend my job to others. I wouldn't tell others about my about my employer because they don't treat people well here, or I'm not comfortable sharing job opportunities with others within my network because I'm really embarrassed on how they treat us. I've heard that. So think long term. And Mark Cuban shared this. He is the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He talked about how employers treat their employees during this time will really impact their brand. Um, and there was I think, a Gallup 2017 survey, workforce survey, that really talked about engagement and talked about how leaders and managers treat their employees, and how they engage them will impact them and impact their brand, right? So this has a ripple effect. So just wanted to remind you of that. And Richard Branson, who is um, the CEO of Virgin Airlines, or chairman, I'm sorry, of Virgin, the Virgin Group, says that if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your business. And this man is a multi-billionaire, a very successful business person. Um, and this is really important. I talk about this all the time. People are your number one asset. People are absolutely your number one asset, whether it comes to work or anything else. And the way you invest in them will pay dividends in the end. And if you do not make meaningful investments in your workforce, it will be reflected in how they engage your clients and engage your customers, right? And I've been head of HR in a number of organizations that have done a great job investing in the workforce. And I was recruited to work in organizations where they didn't do such a great job, and we had to redesign or create development, leadership development, management training, employee engagement type of programs and services, so that we could make the investments in the workforce so that they can engage customers, clients, constituents in a more thoughtful way, right? In a way that really was consistent with what customers wanted and needed. So it's important to take care of the employees, and this is a huge opportunity to do that. So this is the bonus part that I did not share during the live webinar, and you get to see here. I want to talk a little bit about self-care. So some of the things I talked about in this presentation won't just help your employees, they'll help you. Maybe you really need to reset expectations on what you think can get done at this point in time. Maybe you need to reprioritize, focusing more on outcomes and in terms of deliverables that really are achievable or feasible during this time. Maybe you need to strike more of a work-life balance for yourself. So I wanted to share some of the things that I'm doing. I think the worst thing is to tell people that they should self-care, and I'm not doing that myself. And I am someone who can work a lot of hours. I don't really need anyone to manage me per se. And that's why I can be a business owner. But self-care is not something that has always been a priority for me. After a number of health scares, I'm learning to prioritize my health, prioritize my mental health, and create a schedule that will support that. So in terms of self-care, one of the things I would recommend is that you build a schedule. So for instance, I have a schedule that will allow me to work the way I work. which is once I get focused on something, I will just work throughout the day and literally throughout the night to get it done. But to build in some self-care, I have to give myself days off that I'm not doing work. And that requires some self discipline, that requires some accountability, and people who, check in with me and make sure that I am giving myself some free time. But having a schedule will allow you to be productive, will allow you to see where you're spending your time, will make sure that you build in time for yourself. And so I'll just give you an example of my schedule. So Mondays are for me the days where I focus on planning. I make calls. I look at my calendar. I schedule things on Mondays, but generally, pre-pandemic, I try not to go out. That was the day really for me to plan, to make the calls and to schedule things. Tuesday through Thursdays, well, Tuesday through Friday really were the days where I mean, if that meant I'm working 12, 14, 16 hours, then that's what I was doing. But I knew because Mondays were a little bit more relaxed, that I could do that. And then Saturdays are a little bit more relaxed, maybe from the morning to about noon or 1 o'clock. I'm maybe doing some work, but the rest of the day I'm really focusing on, personal items. Like paying bills and grocery shopping and doing laundry and cleaning my house or whatever. Sundays is faith, family, friends, and fun. So first thing I'm watching services online because we can't really go into a place of worship. I go to the Partis House here in Dallas, and so I can't go into a place of worship, but I can definitely watch online. And so I'll watch online. I have a call with family in the evening, and we're all on the Zoom call, and we're checking in, and we're talking, we're praying, we're talking and discussing different things during that call. Maybe I'll check in with friends, and I'll check in with friends throughout the week. They'll check in with me, but it really is a time to really focus on that. And maybe I'll watch movies or something later on. And it's not to say that Monday through Friday I'm not checking in with friends, or I'm not checking with family, or I'm not watching movies. There are downtimes during my days, Monday through Friday, after I get some of the critical work done. But I am not spending too much downtime. I'm really focusing on work during that time, with Monday being my lightest day of the week. Um, so those are some things I think you could do around building a schedule so that you already have time built in to just take care of you, and you're not working as much every single day of the week. I'm reading a lot more. I read scriptures every morning. Again, I'm reading Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Um, there is something else that I was reading as part of, let me see here, I have a couple of books that I want to share. So I was reading this, I was part of a, a women's um, life enrichment program through my church. And I read this book before, but this was part of our reading. And this is Soar by T.D. Jakes. And this book is really for entrepreneurs, for those who are interested in starting a business. Great book. I've read it a couple of times. Great book to consider reading. And another book that I've been reading, again, because I'm a person of faith, is, there are times where you just don't know what to pray because you're just so stressed. And I met this author, Deborah Smith, Haggis, I think is how you pronounce her name, but emergency prayers. These are just great prayers just to help during these times. And then the next book that I'll be reading is Identity Leadership by Stedman Graham. I heard him speak at the International Leadership Summit. Was it in Tampa in 2019? And what he had to say about really personal leadership is so, so good. So I'm excited about getting into that book next. But I definitely take some time to read um, and just give myself a mental break. Another thing you can do to exercise self-care is to manage up. In the live webinar, we talked about this. When your management style or your leadership style is different from your own manager or leader. And one of the things that I shared was to really, if your team has some concerns, right, around the work, around they have certain challenges, this is the time to share that with your leader, with your supervisor, with your boss or your CEO, right? And share your recommendations on how you all can manage the work differently and maybe empower people, lead differently, maybe engage them differently. Maybe they need to hear a little bit more from your boss, from your leadership, from your CEO. And they need information. This is an opportunity to really communicate to the workforce on what's happening, right? To really calm fears. Having facts, having information will definitely help people feel more relaxed, or maybe calm fears a little bit or calm their anxieties. This is an opportunity to do that. So managing up is a way to help manage your stress levels, to exercise some self-care, so that if there are things that you really can't focus on right now, or projects that are being asked of you to focus on, and you don't think it's the right time, you should respectfully push back or maybe give your leadership some feedback on the realities, and suggest or recommend some alternatives, right? Nothing worse than having people come back to you as a leader, and this is if you're managing up, but or you're managing in general, right? There's nothing worse than having people come back to you with more problems. So when you're managing up, make sure that you're sharing information, you're informing leadership, but that you're also providing recommendations, solutions, or maybe have 2 or 3 recommendations on how to address the issue, so that there's one less problem that your boss has to worry about. All right. And the last thing in terms of disconnecting, um, get off of Zoom, get off of GoToMeetings, get off of Microsoft Team, and just take a breather. I talked about avoiding burnout, looking at and staring at a computer or a device all day long will hurt your eyes, will stress you out. You're probably prone to make more mistakes because you're just staring at screens all day long. Disconnect, disconnect, disconnect. Read a book. I shared some options there, and maybe there are options that others may want to share with their networks. But maybe read a book, take a walk if you can take a walk, and if it's okay for you to do so. Connect with your family, do some puzzles. This is the time to really disconnect, maybe once a day for 15 minutes or an hour or a few hours, but make sure you're disconnecting so that you're not exhausting your eyes and exhausting your brain. and staring at things and not really being productive. So I hope this has helped you all. If you'd like more information about Saintcyr Consulting, the website is here for you. If you have any questions or you are interested in coaching services, or you're interested, excuse me, in different webinars or topics, please feel free to email us at info@saintcyrconsulting.com. But when there are new and upcoming webinars, we will share that on the social media pages, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And the webinars will not all be free, but they will be at a reasonable price that you and your teams and others can take advantage of during this time and afterwards. But I will be putting out a new webinar fairly soon, but we'll share that in advance. And please, if you'd like to get the updates first, subscribe at saintcyrconsulting.com. On the home page, you can subscribe there. Again, if you'd like more information about our services, you can go to the website on the contact us page, fill that out, and we'll follow up with you, or email us at info@saintcyrconsulting.com. But I hope this is helpful. The goal is really just to help folks and be of service during these uncertain and very challenging times. So if you wouldn't mind, please share your thoughts and feedback about this webinar. And if you have any other topics that you're interested in hearing about, please feel free to email info@saintcyrconsulting.com. But this is Jessie Saintcyr, principal owner of Saintcyr Consulting. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.